There is a moment that has already arrived. You may not have recognized it. You may have walked past it this morning, or last week, or 6 months ago, telling yourself it was just a feeling, just a passing thought, just another restless night where something in you kept insisting that the life you are living is not the life you are supposed to be living. You may have filed it away under "not yet," or maybe someday, or "I'll know when the time is right." But here is what you have been avoiding looking at directly. The turning point is not ahead of you. It is not a future event waiting to announce itself with clarity and perfect timing. It is happening right now in the quality of attention you are bringing to your own life, in the gap between what you see and what you are willing to admit you see. And the reason most people miss it is not because they are not intelligent enough to recognize it. It is because they are watching the wrong thing. This is not a video about motivation. It is not about pushing harder or finding your purpose or unlocking some hidden potential that has been waiting for the right key. Those frameworks assume the turning point is a destination you drive toward. What we are going to do today is something different. We are going to watch the turning point itself closely enough that you can see exactly what it is made of, exactly why it keeps slipping past, and exactly what happens in the moment you stop waiting for it and start inhabiting it. Because here's the thing about a turning point that no one says clearly. It is not primarily an event. It is a quality of observation. It is the moment when you see something you have been looking at for years in a way that makes it impossible to continue pretending you have not seen it. The circumstances do not change first. The seeing changes first. And then, because you have seen it, everything else has no choice but to reorganize around that clarity. This is not philosophy. This is the precise mechanics of how consciousness interacts with the structure of reality. And we are going to go all the way into it. So let me ask you something before we go any further. Not rhetorically. Actually ask yourself this right now. What is the thing in your life that you already know needs to change, that you have known for longer than you want to admit, but that you have been circling without landing on directly? Not the surface version of it, not the polished story you tell people when they ask how you are doing, the actual thing. The one that surfaces at 2 a.m. when the noise of the day has gone quiet and there is nothing left to distract you from what you already know. You know what it is. You have always known what it is. The question is not whether you can see it. The question is whether you are willing to look at it without flinching. Because that willingness, that precise act of unflinching observation, is not a prerequisite for the turning point. It is the turning point. Let's go deeper into what that actually means. There is a concept in quantum physics that has been described many times but rarely understood in its full implication. When physicists study subatomic particles, they encounter something that has no real parallel in the classical world we think we live in. A particle, before it is observed, does not have a definite location, a definite spin, a definite state. It exists as a superposition, a simultaneous spread of all its possible states held in quantum probability. The particle is not secretly in one place, and we just do not know which place. It genuinely occupies multiple possibilities at once. This is not a metaphor. This is what the mathematics describes and what experiment after experiment has confirmed. And then observation happens. A measurement is made. The act of looking, of registering the particle's state, causes the superposition to collapse. The spread of possibilities resolves into a single actuality, The particle is here, not there. It is spin up, not spin down. One possibility becomes real, and all the others cease to be active. Now here's where most people stop. They hear this and they think, fascinating, but what does that have to do with my life? And this is exactly where the most important insight gets missed, because the mistake is to think that quantum mechanics describes a world that only exists at the subatomic scale and stops being relevant when you zoom out to the level of human experience. But consciousness is not separate from the quantum field. Consciousness is the observer. And the act of observation, the quality of attention you bring to any system, does not just register what is already there. It participates in determining what becomes real. Your life right now is a superposition. It contains multiple possible trajectories, multiple possible versions of the next chapter, multiple possible selves that could emerge from this exact moment. They are all genuinely present as possibility. None of them is more real than the others until observation collapses the field. Until you look at something so directly, so unflinchingly, that one possibility crystallizes into actuality and the others recede. The turning point is the collapse. It is the moment when observation becomes precise enough that the superposition resolves. And what most people do not understand is that you can delay this collapse indefinitely by refusing to look directly, by keeping your attention diffuse, by circling the thing you need to see without ever landing on it. As long as you maintain that diffuse, avoidant quality of observation, the field stays open, which feels like freedom, but is actually the deepest form of stagnation, because nothing can become real until you look at it clearly enough to let it be real. This is where it gets precise. The reason your turning point keeps feeling like it is just around the corner, always approaching but never arriving, is not because the circumstances are not right. It is because you have been maintaining a quality of attention that is just clear enough to see the problem, but not clear enough to see it completely. You have been looking at it through a kind of protective blur, close enough to feel the discomfort, far enough to avoid the full weight of what you would have to acknowledge if you look directly. And this protective blur has a function. It is not stupidity. It is not weakness. It is a sophisticated mechanism that the mind develops to manage the cost of full seeing. Because full seeing has a cost. When you see something completely, you can no longer claim you did not see it. You can no longer make decisions as if you did not know. The comfortable ambiguity that allows you to keep living the way you have been living dissolves. And the mind, which is exquisitely designed for survival and comfort, knows this. So it develops a way of looking that is just enough to register the thing without fully registering it. Just enough awareness to feel the friction without enough clarity to force the change. Watch this in yourself right now. Think about the thing you identified a moment ago, the one you actually know needs to change. Notice what happens in your body as you hold it in your attention. There is probably a kind of tightening, a pulling away, a subtle but consistent pressure that says, yes, but not all the way. Look, but not too closely. Acknowledge, but do not commit to what the acknowledgement would require. That pressure, that pull, that is not evidence that looking is dangerous. That is evidence that looking is powerful. The resistance you feel toward full seeing is proportional to the transformation that full seeing would initiate. The bigger the resistance, the bigger the turning point waiting on the other side of it. If what we are doing here is landing for you, if this quality of looking is already beginning to thin the blur, take a moment to like this video and subscribe so this kind of transmission keeps reaching you, let me show you something about the nature of that resistance, because this is where most people misunderstand what a turning point actually requires. There is a woman named Nadia who spent 11 years in a career she had chosen for entirely reasonable reasons. The pay was good, the work was stable, the people around her were competent and kind. From the outside, and even from most angles on the inside, there was nothing wrong with any of it. And yet, every Sunday evening, without fail, something in her contracted. A low-grade dread that she had learned to interpret as normal, as just the way things are, as the price everyone pays for the stability of a real life. She had looked at this contraction many times. She knew it was there. She had even talked about it with friends, with a therapist, in her own journal. She had named it. She had traced its origins. She had developed a sophisticated understanding of why she felt this way and what it probably meant about her relationship to security and risk, and her parents' values and the stories she had inherited about what a successful life looks like. But here's what she had not done. She had never looked at it without immediately doing something with what she saw. Every time she looked at the Sunday evening contraction, she immediately moved into analysis, into explanation, into the comfortable work of understanding it. And understanding it, she discovered, was the perfect substitute for seeing it. Because understanding gives you the feeling of clarity without the cost of full seeing. You can understand something completely and still look away from it. You can build an elaborate architecture of explanation around something and use that architecture as a screen that keeps you from having to face the thing directly. One evening, Nadia decided to do something different. She sat with the contraction without doing anything with it. No analysis, no explanation, no reaching for the framework that would make it make sense. She just watched it, felt it, let it be exactly what it was without trying to understand it into something manageable. And in that space of pure observation, something shifted. Not because she figured anything out, not because she reached a conclusion or made a decision, but because the thing she had been looking at through the lens of explanation finally got to be seen directly. And what she saw, without the protective layer of understanding between her and it, was not complicated. It was not a complex psychological knot requiring years more of careful unraveling. It was simple, devastating in its simplicity. She did not want to be there. Not in a way that needed more analysis, in a way that was simply, completely, undeniably true. The turning point did not come when she quit. It came in that moment of direct seeing. Everything after that, the practical decisions, the conversations, the logistics of changing her life, those were just the aftermath. The real event was the collapse of the superposition. The moment she looked at the thing she had been circling for 11 years, without the protective blur of explanation between her and it, and saw it completely. Now watch what happened in Nadia's story. Because there is a specific mechanism here that I want you to see clearly. For 11 years, she had been maintaining a relationship with a truth she already knew by keeping it in a state of perpetual analysis. Analysis is not the same as observation. Analysis is what the mind does to a thing after observation has registered it. But when analysis becomes the primary mode of engagement, it actually prevents the deeper observation that transforms. Because analysis is active, analysis does something with what it sees. And the act of doing something with what you see is a way of staying in motion, And staying in motion is a way of never having to fully arrive at the thing itself. This is one of the most subtle and pervasive ways that turning points get missed, not through ignorance, not through avoidance in the obvious sense, but through the substitution of understanding for seeing. The person who reads every book about their pattern, but never sits still with the pattern itself. The person who can explain exactly why they keep choosing unavailable partners but has never watched, without commentary, the precise moment they feel the pull towards someone who cannot fully show up. The person who knows intellectually that they are afraid of success but has never observed in real time the exact moment they begin to self-sabotage. Explanation is the mind's way of being productive in the presence of something it does not want to fully face. And it is extraordinarily convincing because it feels like progress. It feels like doing the work. It feels like being honest with yourself. But there is a test you can apply. After all the understanding, after all the analysis, after all the frameworks and insights and aha moments, has the thing actually changed? Or does it keep showing up in slightly different forms, wearing slightly different clothes, but recognizably, undeniably the same thing you have been analyzing for years? If it keeps showing up, the analysis has not been doing what you thought it was doing. It has been managing the thing, not transforming it. And management and transformation are not the same. Here's what no one tells you about observation. Real observation, the kind that transforms, does not require you to understand what you see. It does not require you to know what to do with what you see. It does not require you to have a plan or a framework or even a language for what you are looking at. It only requires that you look completely, without the protective layer of interpretation between you and the thing itself, and hold your gaze there long enough for the thing to be fully seen. Because what happens when something is fully seen is not what the mind predicts. The mind predicts that full seeing will be overwhelming, destabilizing, too much to hold. But the actual experience of full seeing is almost always the opposite. There is a quality of stillness that arrives when you stop managing your relationship with the truth and simply let it be true. Not a numb stillness, not a defeated stillness, a clear stillness. The kind that comes when the energy you have been spending on maintaining the blur is suddenly freed up, and you realize that the blur was costing you more than the clarity ever could. This is the turning point, not the decision that follows, not the action that follows, the stillness that arrives when you stop looking away. Let's pause here, not as a thought exercise, as an actual observation. I want you to bring to mind the specific thing you have been circling, the thing you know. And I want you to practice right now looking at it without immediately doing something with what you see. No analysis, no problem solving, no reaching for the explanation that will make it feel more manageable. Just watch it, the way you would watch a flame, not trying to understand the chemistry of combustion, just watching the flame be what it is. Notice what happens in the first few seconds. The mind will move almost immediately toward explanation or planning or some other form of productive engagement. That is normal. That is the trained response. Just notice it. Watch the urge to analyze the same way you are watching the thing itself. You do not have to resist it. Just see it clearly. Here is the urge to explain. Here is the urge to plan. Here's the mind doing what it does when it wants to stay in motion. And underneath that motion, underneath the productive busyness of the analyzing mind, there is something that has been waiting very patiently for you to simply be present with it. Let yourself arrive there. even for 30 seconds. Let the thing you know be known without the layer of management between you and it. Notice what happens to your breathing. Notice what happens to the quality of tension in your body. Notice whether the thing feels more threatening when you look at it directly, or whether the looking itself brings a kind of relief that the circling never could. What you just did, even imperfectly, even for a moment, is closer to the turning point than anything you have been doing with your understanding of the situation. Because the turning point lives in the quality of your observation, not in the conclusions your observation produces. What did you notice just now in that pause? Not what you thought about it, but what you actually saw when you stopped explaining it to yourself and just watched. Drop it in the comments. The specific thing that came into focus when the analysis went quiet, even briefly. Now let's go deeper into why turning points have timing and why that timing is not what you think it is. There is a common belief about turning points, so common it has become part of the cultural wallpaper, that they arrive when the circumstances finally align. When the right opportunity appears, when the pain gets bad enough. When the stars, metaphorically or literally, line up in a way that makes the change feel inevitable. And there is a partial truth in this. Circumstances do matter. Context does matter. There are moments when the external environment is more conducive to certain kinds of change than others. But here is what that framework misses entirely. The circumstances that create a turning point are not independent of the quality of your observation. They are, in a very precise sense, a function of it. The opportunity that appears at the right moment, the conversation that opens a door, the synchronicity that feels like the universe finally cooperating. These are not random events that happen to coincide with your readiness. They are what becomes visible when your observation becomes clear enough to see them. This is not magical thinking. This is the practical consequence of attention. When you are maintaining a diffuse, avoidant quality of observation toward the central truth of your situation, your attention is occupied. Not with the wrong things exactly, but with the management of the blur, with the energy required to keep the full picture just slightly out of focus. And that occupied attention is not available for the kind of clear seeing that recognizes an opportunity when it arrives. Think about the last time you learned a new word, a word you had never noticed before, and then suddenly, within days, you began hearing it everywhere. The word had been there all along. The world had not changed. What changed was your perceptual filter. Your attention had been calibrated to notice it, and so it began to appear. This is not a coincidence. This is how perception works. You see what your attention is calibrated to see, and your attention is calibrated by the quality of your observation. When your observation is diffuse and avoidant, you are calibrated to see evidence that things are fine enough, that the change is not quite necessary yet, that the timing is not quite right. Not because you are lying to yourself, but because that is genuinely what a diffuse observational field registers. The opportunities that would require full seeing to act on remain invisible. The conversations that would require you to have fully acknowledged the truth remain just slightly out of reach. The synchronicities that would feel like confirmation remain just slightly ambiguous. And then something shifts in the quality of your observation. You look at the central thing directly, even for a moment. The superposition begins to collapse, and suddenly, as if from nowhere, the opportunity appears. The conversation happens, the confirmation arrives, not because the universe waited for your readiness and then delivered, but because your newly calibrated attention can now see what was always there. This is why people who have genuine turning points so often describe the experience as, "I don't know why I hadn't seen it before. It was right there the whole time." Because it was. The circumstances were not waiting for them. Their observation was waiting for itself. Now here is the layer underneath that, and this is where the real precision lives. There is a specific quality of avoidance that is unique to turning points, different from ordinary procrastination or ordinary resistance to change. And it is important to be able to recognize it because it masquerades as wisdom, it masquerades as patience, it masquerades as being realistic. It sounds like this: "I know I need to change this, but I want to make sure I'm doing it for the right reasons." Or, "I can see the problem, but I don't want to act impulsively." Or, "I'm still gathering information before I make a move." Or, "The timing isn't quite right yet, but I'll know when it is." These are not unreasonable things to think. In many contexts, they are genuinely wise, but in the context of a turning point that has been circling for years, they are something else. They are the sophisticated language of a mind that has learned to dress avoidance in the clothes of discernment. The test is not whether the language sounds reasonable. The test is whether the thing has been circling long enough that the language is doing something other than what it says it is doing. When you have been gathering information about the same situation for 3 years, you are not gathering information. When you have been waiting for the right reasons for 5 years, you are not waiting for the right reasons. You are using the language of wisdom to maintain the blur. And the blur is costing you the turning point. This is not a judgment. This is an observation. The mind is extraordinarily good at this. It is one of the most sophisticated things the mind does, and the only way to see through it is to look at it directly, which is precisely what it is designed to prevent you from doing. Let me give you a way to test whether you are in genuine discernment or sophisticated avoidance. Ask yourself this: if you already knew the right reasons, if the timing were already perfect, if you had already gathered enough information, what would you do? Not what would you consider doing. Not what would you eventually get around to doing. What would you do? If the answer comes immediately, without hesitation, you already know. The discernment is complete. What you are calling waiting for clarity is actually something else. It is the space between knowing and being willing to act on what you know. And that space has a name. It is not wisdom, it is the last layer of protective blur before the full seeing arrives. And here is what is important to understand about that space. It is not empty, it is not wasted time. It is the quantum superposition in its final moments before collapse. The probability field holding all the possible versions of your next chapter in suspension, waiting for the observation that will resolve it. Every moment you spend in that space is a moment you are closer to the collapse. Not because time is running out, but because the pressure of what you already know keeps building until the blur can no longer hold. But here is the thing about pressure and turning points that most people do not see clearly. The pressure does not force the turning point. It creates the conditions in which the turning point becomes possible. The turning point itself is still an act of observation. It is still a choice to look. And the choice to look is always available, regardless of how much pressure has built, regardless of how long the circling has continued. The turning point is not something that eventually happens to you. It is something you do. Even when it feels like it is happening to you, even when it feels like the circumstances finally forced your hand, look more closely, And you will find that there was a moment, however brief, when you chose to let yourself see. Let's look at the mechanics of that moment in more detail. There is a man named Eli who had been in a relationship for 7 years that he knew, in the clearest part of himself, had ended. Not because of cruelty or betrayal or any of the dramatic reasons that make leaving feel justified and clean, but because the two of them had grown into people who were genuinely not right for each other, and the kindness they felt for one another had become a kind of prison. They were staying because leaving felt like a betrayal of the history, of the investment, of the person the other had been when they first chose each other. Eli had been circling this for 3 years. He had thought about it from every angle. He had read about it, talked about it in therapy, journaled about it, made pro and con lists, had long conversations with his closest friends. He understood the situation with extraordinary sophistication. He could trace the exact developmental arc of how they had grown apart. He could articulate the precise dynamic that kept them both stuck. He knew, intellectually, everything there was to know about the situation. And he stayed. Because knowing is not the same as seeing, the turning point when it came was not dramatic. It was not a fight or a revelation or a moment of crisis. It was a Tuesday evening in autumn. They were sitting on opposite ends of the couch, both looking at their phones, and Eli looked up and watched her for a moment. Not with analysis, not with the usual internal narration about what this scene meant and what it said about the relationship and what he should probably do about it. Just watched her. The way she held her phone, the slight tension in her jaw, the way she was somewhere else entirely, not in the room with him, not in the relationship with him, but somewhere inside herself that he had not been invited into for a very long time. And he saw it, not the problem. He had seen the problem 1,000 times. He saw her. He saw him. He saw the two of them clearly, without the protective layer of analysis between him and the reality of what was actually there. And the superposition collapsed, not into grief, though grief came later, into clarity. A clarity so complete and so still that it was almost peaceful. He did not leave that night. He did not have a dramatic conversation that night. But the turning point had happened. Because something had been seen that could not be unseen, and everything that followed, the conversations, the decisions, the grief and the relief and the long work of separating two lives that had been intertwined, all of that was the aftermath of a single moment of direct seeing on a Tuesday evening in autumn. Watch what Eli's story reveals about the structure of a turning point, because there is something precise here that is easy to miss. The turning point was not the decision. The turning point was not the action. The turning point was not even the emotion, though emotion followed. The turning point was the collapse of the interpretive layer between Eli and what he was looking at. The moment when the story he had been telling about the situation, the story that kept it in the realm of something to be understood and managed rather than something to be seen clearly, fell away. And what remained was just reality, simple, undeniable, already known, but now seen. This is the structure of every genuine turning point. There is always a moment when the story stops and the seeing begins. And the story, whatever its specific content, whatever its specific sophistication, always serves the same function. It keeps the full weight of what you already know at the manageable distance. It lets you live with the knowledge without having to act on the knowing. It lets you be aware without being present. And the moment the story stops, not because you have figured out a better story, not because you have reached a conclusion, but because you have simply looked at the thing directly long enough that the story no longer has the energy to sustain itself. That is the turning point. That is the collapse. That is the moment when one version of your life becomes real and the others begin to recede. Has there been a moment in your own life when a story you were telling yourself finally fell away and you saw something with that kind of simple, undeniable clarity? What was the thing that dissolved when you stopped explaining it and just looked? I want to hear it in the comments. Now let's look at something that is going to be uncomfortable, because this is where the real substance of what we are exploring lives, and it requires looking at something that most people in this space do not say directly. The turning point can pass you by, not permanently, not forever, but it can pass in the sense that the window of maximum clarity, the moment when the pressure of what you know has built to the point where the full seeing is most available, can close. Not because the truth goes away. The truth never goes away, but because the mind is extraordinarily adaptable and it can learn to live with higher and higher levels of pressure without collapsing the blur. It can incorporate the knowledge of the thing, the awareness of the thing, even the discomfort of the thing, into the ordinary texture of daily life. And when that happens, the turning point does not disappear. It calcifies. It becomes harder to reach. Not impossible, but harder. This is what people mean when they say they feel stuck. Not that the truth has become unclear. Not that they do not know what needs to change, but that the mechanism of direct seeing has become so thoroughly overlaid with the architecture of management that accessing it requires more than just willingness. It requires a kind of deliberate dismantling of the very sophisticated structures the mind has built to make the unlooked-at thing livable. The people who describe feeling stuck for years, who say they know exactly what they need to do but cannot seem to do it, are almost always in this situation. The turning point has been available. It has been available many times, but each time it approached, the mind's management system intercepted it, converted the potential moment of full seeing into another round of analysis, another period of waiting for the right time, another layer of sophisticated understanding that substituted for the direct observation that would have collapsed the superposition. And the longer this continues, the more the mind invests in the management architecture, because the management architecture has become load-bearing. It is not just protecting you from the discomfort of full seeing anymore. It is holding up the entire structure of how you understand yourself and your situation. Dismantling it starts to feel like it would bring the whole thing down. But here's what you need to see clearly. The thing that feels like it would bring the whole structure down is not the seeing, it is the story. The architecture of management is not your life. It is the story you have been telling about your life in order to make the unlooked-at thing livable. And the story, however elaborate, however sophisticated, however genuinely useful it may have been at some point, is not the same as the life. When the story comes down, the life does not come down with it. The life is still there. It has always been there. It was there before the story was built around it, and it will be there after the story dissolves. What comes down when you stop managing and start seeing is not your life. It is the blur. And the blur was never protecting you. It was protecting the story. It was protecting the architecture of avoidance. And the cost of that protection, paid in the currency of the life you are not living, has been accumulating for longer than you want to look at directly. Let's look at that cost, not in the abstract. Specifically, every day you spend maintaining the blur is a day spent in a particular quality of experience. Not necessarily a miserable day, not necessarily an obviously wasted day, but a day with a specific texture that you know very well if you are honest about it. A day with a kind of low-grade flatness underneath the ordinary activities. A day where the most alive version of yourself is held slightly in reserve, because fully showing up would require fully seeing, and fully seeing would require the turning point, and the turning point is still being postponed. This flatness is not depression exactly. It is more like the difference between a room with all the windows open and a room where the windows are closed but clean. The light gets in, things are visible, but there is no fresh air. There is a quality of staleness that you have learned to stop noticing because you have been in the room so long. The turning point is the moment you open the window, not the moment you decide to open the window, not the moment you understand why the window has been closed. The moment you actually open it, the moment the fresh air arrives, and you realize with a kind of shock that you had forgotten what air actually felt like, that you had been breathing the recycled air of your own management system for so long that you had redefined it as normal. This is what people describe after genuine turning points, not primarily triumph or relief, though those come. First, almost always, a quality of shock at how different it feels to be in the same life without the blur, the same circumstances often, the same practical situation, but a completely different quality of presence within it. Because the energy that was going into maintaining the blur is now available. And that energy, freed up and returned to the present moment, changes the quality of everything. This is the quantum mechanics of it. The superposition was not just holding your possible futures in suspension, it was consuming energy to maintain itself. Quantum superposition is not a passive state, it is an active one. It requires the continuous investment of the system's energy to sustain the spread of possibilities. When the superposition collapses, that energy is released. Not lost, released, available, present. And this is why people who have genuine turning points often describe a sudden surge of clarity and energy that seems disproportionate to what actually happened. Nothing dramatic changed in their circumstances, but an enormous amount of energy was suddenly freed from the work of maintaining the blur, and it flooded back into the present moment, into the aliveness of actually being here, in this life, seeing it clearly. Let's go into the practice now. Not a conceptual exercise, an actual observation. I want you to find a place to sit where you will not be disturbed for a few minutes. Not because what follows is fragile, but because it requires a quality of attention that is hard to maintain in the middle of noise and movement. Sit with your back reasonably straight, not rigid, just upright enough that you are present rather than collapsed. Now bring to mind the specific thing you have been circling. The thing you know, not the story about it, not the analysis of it, the thing itself. If you notice the story arising, notice it, and then look past it to what the story is about, the actual situation, the actual truth, the actual thing that is there when you remove the interpretation. Hold your attention on it, not aggressively, not with the intention of figuring it out or deciding what to do about it. Just watch it, the way you would watch the sky. The sky is not something you solve, it is not something you need to understand. It is just there and you can watch it. Notice the first impulse that arises, the impulse to analyze, to plan, to explain, to minimize, to catastrophize, to do anything other than simply observe. Notice that impulse without following it. You do not have to suppress it. Just watch it arise and see it for what it is, the mind's trained response to direct observation of something it has been managing, and then return your attention to the thing itself, the actual truth, the one you already know. Stay there for a moment, not a moment of doing, a moment of seeing. Let the thing be exactly what it is. Let it be as large as it actually is, not the managed version of it that fits comfortably into your ordinary consciousness, but the full-scale version, the one that has been waiting for you to look at it this directly. Notice what happens to your body. There may be a heaviness or a tightening or a quality of something releasing or a kind of stillness that is different from the stillness of not looking. All of these are signals, not of danger, of contact. You are making contact with something real. Stay with it. Breathe. Not to manage what you are feeling, just to stay present with what you are seeing. And now, from that place of direct observation, ask yourself this: not what should I do, but what do I actually know? Not the analyzed version, not the understood version, the known version. The thing that is simply true, underneath all the layers of management, when you look at it this directly. Let whatever arises be there. Do not rush past it. Do not immediately convert it into a plan or a decision or a next step. Let it be what it is. A truth, seen directly. This is the turning point, not the decision that might follow. This, the quality of seeing you are in right now. Now let's look at what happens after the turning point, because this is where a different kind of misunderstanding lives, and it is important to see it clearly. Most people, when they imagine a turning point, imagine it as a beginning, the moment before the real change starts, the launch pad for the new life. And there is a sense in which this is true. But there is also a way in which this framing puts the turning point back in the future, makes it a means to an end rather than the thing itself, and in doing so, subtly undermines its power. The turning point is not a beginning, it is a completion. It is the completion of a long cycle of circling, the moment when the orbit finally closes and the center is reached. And what you find at the center is not a new beginning waiting for you. It is the present moment, fully inhabited, without the blur. The actions that follow a genuine turning point do not feel like launching toward something new. They feel like arriving somewhere you were always going. They have a quality of inevitability that is completely different from the forced quality of action taken before the turning point. Before the turning point, action in the direction of change requires effort, willpower, constant recommitment, because you are acting against the grain of the unresolved seeing. After the turning point, the same action often feels almost effortless. Not because it is easy in a practical sense, but because it is aligned. Because you are no longer acting against the current of your own avoidance. You are moving with the current of what you have already seen. This is why willpower-based approaches to change so often fail or succeed temporarily and then reverse. Willpower is the attempt to act in a direction that the quality of your observation does not yet support. You are trying to move toward the change while the seeing that would make the change natural and inevitable is still being withheld. And willpower can do this for a while. It is a real resource. But it is a finite resource being used to bridge the gap between where your observation is and where your actions are trying to go. And eventually, the gap reasserts itself. The turning point closes the gap, not by making the action easier in a motivational sense, but by making the action continuous with the seeing. You act because you have seen, not because you have decided to try harder. This is why the most important thing you can do right now, the most leveraged thing, the thing that will have more impact on the actual trajectory of your life than any strategy or plan or commitment, is to complete the seeing. Not to decide, not to plan, not to commit, to see fully whatever it is that you have been circling. To let the observation be complete enough that the superposition collapses and the clarity arrives that makes everything else obvious. Because here is what becomes available on the other side of the turning point that is not available before it. Not just the specific change you have been postponing. Something more fundamental, a different relationship to your own life. A different quality of presence within it. The experience of actually being here, in this life, seeing it clearly, rather than managing your relationship with what you already know. This is the thing that people who have been through genuine turning points describe as the real gift. Not the external change, though that matters. The quality of aliveness that returns when you stop spending your energy on the blur. The sense of being present in your own experience in a way that the management mode makes impossible. The feeling of being, for perhaps the first time in a long time, genuinely awake inside your own life. Let me show you one more layer of this, because there is something about the timing of turning points that we have not fully looked at yet, and it is the most important thing. There is a woman named Seren who had spent most of her adult life waiting for the moment when she would feel ready to write the book she had been carrying for 12 years, ready to leave the city that had never felt like home, ready to stop performing the version of herself that her family expected and start inhabiting the version that had been waiting quietly and persistently just underneath the performance. She was not lazy. She was not fearful in any obvious sense. She was, by every external measure, a capable and accomplished person. But she had a belief so deep and so thoroughly integrated into her sense of herself that she had never examined it directly, that readiness was a state that arrived from outside. That at some point, the conditions would be right, the preparation would be complete, the fear would be sufficiently reduced, and she would know that it was time. That the turning point would announce itself clearly enough that she could not miss it. She waited for this announcement for a long time, and it did not come. Not because the turning point was not available, not because the readiness was not real, but because the announcement she was waiting for was not the way turning points work. Turning points do not announce themselves. They do not arrive with clarity already packaged and delivered. The clarity is what you find on the other side of the looking, not what you receive before you look. What Seren was waiting for was permission. Permission from some external source of authority, some undeniable signal from the universe, some condition of readiness that would make the looking feel safe before she did it. And this waiting, this permission-seeking, was the most sophisticated form of avoidance she had ever developed, because it was framed entirely in the language of wisdom. I want to be sure. I want to do this right. I want to be ready. The turning point came as it always does, not when the conditions were right, but when she stopped waiting for the conditions to be right and looked at the thing directly. Not because she had gathered enough courage, not because the fear had diminished, but because she had finally looked at the waiting itself closely enough to see what it actually was. Not wisdom, not discernment, the last and most elaborate layer of the blur. And in seeing the waiting for what it was, the waiting dissolved, not into action immediately, into clarity, the kind of clarity that makes action not a matter of courage, but a matter of simple alignment with what you have seen. The book was written, the city was left, the performance was retired, not because the conditions became right, because the seeing became complete. Here's what Saren's story reveals about timing that is essential to understand. The turning point is not waiting for you to be ready, you are waiting for yourself to look. And looking is not a function of readiness, it is a function of willingness. And willingness is available right now, not someday, not when the conditions are better, now. This is the most important thing in this entire transmission. The turning point is not a future event. It is a present quality of observation. It is available in this moment, in the same moment you are in right now, to the exact degree that you are willing to look at what you already know without the protective layer of management between you and the knowing. And the reason this matters so urgently is not that the turning point will disappear if you do not seize it now. The truth does not disappear. But the window of maximum clarity, the moment when the pressure of what you know has built to the point where the full seeing is most available, does not stay open indefinitely. The mind is adaptive. It can learn to live with the pressure. It can incorporate the awareness of the turning point into the architecture of management. And when it does, reaching the full seeing requires more. Not more courage, more willingness to dismantle what has been built around the thing you know. The turning point is most available right now, not because of any external circumstance, because you are here in this moment with your attention on the thing you know, with the question of what it would mean to see it completely alive in your awareness. This is the moment of maximum availability. And what you do with your attention in this moment, not tomorrow, not when you have thought about it more, but right now, is the most consequential choice available to you. Let's do the final practice. And this one is different from the earlier one. The earlier practice was about seeing the thing. This one is about seeing the observer. Close your eyes if you are in a place where you can do that. You have been watching the thing you know throughout this transmission. You have been holding it in your attention, circling it, approaching it, feeling its weight, feeling the resistance to seeing it fully. All of that has been happening in your awareness. Now I want you to turn the observation around. Instead of watching the thing, watch the one who is watching. Who is the one who has been looking at this thing? Not the mind that analyzes it, not the part of you that manages it, not the story that has been built around it. The one who is watching all of that. The awareness that is present for all of it. That has been present for the years of circling, that has always known the thing even when the mind was busy managing it. Watch that one, the watcher. Not as a concept, as a direct experience. The awareness that is present right now, reading these words, holding the thing you know, feeling the weight of the turning point. This awareness, this quality of presence that is watching, has never been confused. It has never been in avoidance. It has always seen clearly. The confusion, the blur, the management, all of that has been happening in the mind. But the awareness watching the mind has always known exactly what is there. It has always seen the thing directly. It has been waiting, not for the right moment, but for you to look at it, looking. This is the observer, not the self that analyzes or manages or plans, the awareness that is present before all of that, the one that has always known. Stay with this for a moment, not as a philosophical concept, as a direct experience. The awareness that is reading these words right now, That awareness is not confused. That awareness has never been confused. It has always known exactly what is there. And from this place, from the perspective of the awareness that has always seen clearly, look at the thing you know one more time, not with the analyzing mind, with this, with the clear awareness that has never needed the blur. Notice how different it feels to look from here. Notice how the thing that seemed so complex, so requiring of analysis and management, looks from the perspective of the awareness that has always known. Notice the simplicity of it, the clarity of it, the already known quality of it. This is the turning point, not a future event. This quality of seeing, this perspective, this awareness looking at what it has always known. You can return here, not just in a formal practice, in any moment, in the middle of the ordinary day, in the middle of the noise and the busyness and the management. You can turn the observation around and look at the one who is looking, and from that perspective, the blur dissolves. Not because you have done anything, because you have seen clearly. And clarity is the only force that transforms without resistance. Now let's look at what it means to sustain this, because the turning point is not a one-time event. It is a quality of observation that can be cultivated, deepened, and returned to. And understanding how to sustain it is the difference between a turning point that transforms a single area of your life and a turning point that changes the fundamental quality of how you inhabit your life. The most common mistake people make after a genuine turning point is to treat it as an event that has now concluded. They have the clarity, they take the action, they make the change, and then they return to the same quality of observation that created the need for the turning point in the first place. They have changed the content of their life without changing the quality of their relationship to it. And so, over time, new things accumulate in the space of the unlooked at. New patterns form around new unacknowledged truths. New management architectures are built. And eventually, a new turning point becomes necessary. This is the cycle that people describe as, I keep ending up in the same place, not the same literal circumstances, but the same quality of stuck. The same feeling of knowing something they are not looking at directly. The same low-grade flatness underneath the ordinary activities. The way out of this cycle is not to be more vigilant about looking at specific things. It is to change the baseline quality of your observation. To cultivate the observer state, the awareness that is always present and always clear as the ground from which you live, rather than the destination you occasionally visit. This is what the quantum mechanics actually points to when you follow it all the way. The observer effect is not just a feature of laboratory measurements. It is the fundamental structure of consciousness interacting with reality. And the quality of that interaction, the clarity and directness of your observation, determines not just what you see, but what becomes real. What collapses from the quantum field of possibility into the specific actuality of your lived experience. A life lived from the observer state is not a life without problems or challenges or difficulty. It is a life in which nothing accumulates in the space of the unlooked at, in which the turning points do not build up pressure over years because the seeing is continuous, in which the gap between what you know and what you are willing to acknowledge is small enough that it does not require a crisis to close. This is not an ideal, it is a practice, a daily, ongoing, imperfect practice of turning the observation around, of looking at what you have been looking away from, of letting the full weight of what you already know be present in your awareness without the protective layer of management between you and it. And every time you do this, every time you choose to look directly, rather than manage the blur, you are doing the quantum equivalent of collapsing a small superposition, resolving a small spread of possibility into a specific clarity. And the cumulative effect of this practice over time is a life that feels increasingly alive, increasingly aligned, increasingly like the version of itself that was always possible, but was held in suspension by the quality of your observation. This is what we mean when we say that what you watch, you change. Not just the dramatic turning points, every moment of clear seeing, every choice to look directly rather than manage the blur. Every time you turn the observation around and let the awareness that has always known be the ground from which you live. You've been doing this work throughout this transmission, not just thinking about it, doing it. You have been watching the thing you know. You have been feeling the resistance to full seeing. You have been practicing the observer state. You have been, in the most precise sense of the phrase, inhabiting the turning point. And something has shifted, not dramatically, not with fanfare, but in the quiet, precise way that genuine seeing always shifts things. The superposition has moved. The field has collapsed a little further toward clarity. The blur has thinned. What you do with this in the next hour, the next day, the next week, will determine whether this becomes one of the many moments of clarity that get absorbed back into the management architecture, or whether it becomes the turning point that it is available to be. If there is someone in your life who has been circling something for a long time, someone who already knows but hasn't yet looked directly, consider sending them this. Not as advice, as permission. Because when someone receives the invitation to look from another person who is also choosing to look, something shifts in the field between them. The seeing becomes less isolating. The willingness becomes more available. What one person cannot quite access alone sometimes opens when another person is watching alongside them. And here is the thing I want to leave you with. The thing that is most true about turning points and most rarely said directly. You do not have to be ready. You do not have to have enough courage. You do not have to have figured out what comes next. You do not have to have a plan. You only have to be willing to look fully, without the protective layer of management between you and what you already know, for long enough that the thing gets to be completely seen. That is all. That is the entire thing. The willingness to look completely, everything else follows from that. The decisions follow, the actions follow, the changes follow, the new chapter follows. All of it follows from the quality of the seeing, because the seeing is the turning point, not a step toward it, the thing itself. You already know what you need to see, you have always known. The question has never been whether you could see it. The question is whether you are willing to let the seeing be complete. Right now, in this moment, that willingness is available to you. More available than it has ever been. Because you have been here in this transmission with your attention on the thing you know, practicing the quality of observation that makes the turning point not a future event but a present reality. The turning point is not ahead of you. It is here. It is the quality of observation you are in right now. And the moment you let it be complete, the moment you let the seeing be full and direct and unmanaged, everything else will follow. Not because you forced it, not because you manifested it, because you saw it. And what has been seen cannot be unseen. There is a community of people who are doing exactly what you have done today, who are choosing against the pull of the management architecture to look directly, who are practicing the observer state not as a spiritual exercise, but as the most practical thing they know how to do, who are learning one turning point at a time what it means to live from the clarity of continuous seeing rather than the flatness of continuous management. If you saw something today, if the thing you have been circling came into clearer focus, if the quality of your observation shifted even slightly toward the directness that makes turning points real, I want to know. Not in the abstract, specifically. What did you see? What was the thing that came into focus when you stopped managing it and started watching it? Drop it in the comments, not because sharing it makes it more real, though it does. Because naming what you have seen is itself an act of observation. It is the mind participating in the collapse. It is the consciousness confirming to itself, I saw this. It is real. I am not looking away. And if you are not ready to name it publicly, that is fine. But name it somewhere, in a journal, in a voice memo, somewhere that makes the seeing concrete rather than leaving it in the realm of the almost acknowledged. Type this if it landed, I see it, and I'm not looking away. That is not a declaration of what you are going to do. It is an observation of what you have already done. You have looked, and what has been seen cannot be unseen. Stay with what you observed today, not with the plan for what to do about it, with the observation itself. The quality of clarity that arrived when you looked directly. Let that be the ground for the next hour. The next day. Let the observation continue to do what observation does, collapse the blur, resolve the superposition, make real what was always there waiting to be seen. You do not have to unlock the turning point. You only have to stop locking it out. The locking out is the management, the blur, the analysis that substitutes for seeing, the waiting for readiness that is really waiting for permission. Stop locking it out, and the turning point is already there. It was always already there. Waiting, not for the right moment, but for the right quality of attention. You have been watching longer than you realize, and the watching has been working. Every moment of genuine seeing, however brief, however quickly followed by the return of the management mode, has been doing something, has been thinning the blur, has been building the pressure that makes the full seeing more available, has been moving the superposition closer to collapse. You are closer to the turning point than you have ever been. Not because the circumstances have aligned, because you have been willing to look. And that willingness, however imperfect, however intermittent, is the only thing that was ever required. Look, fully, without flinching, without the management layer between you and what you already know. The turning point is not ahead of you, it is here, it is now. It is the quality of seeing you are willing to inhabit. And what you see from this place with this quality of attention will not remain unchanged. You were never meant to look away.